this is Angela from Natural Living Alchemy. Welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be making a glycerite compound for a happy and healthy digestive system. Now you're going to have the option to prepare this as a cold process, which can take up to 4 weeks, or you can make a hot compound like we're going to be making, and you can have your medicine in under 4 hours. This recipe is featuring ginger root and thyme, but you could add so many other things, so be sure to stick around to the end of this video, and I'm going to go over some of my favorite suggestions for some other herbal allies that you could add into this glycerite. I'm going to invite you to check the description box below this video, and in there you're going to find a link to the full written blog article that does go into greater detail regarding the ingredients that we've chosen to go into this glycerite. Before we begin, I just want to remind you that I am not a doctor. Absolutely none of what is on this channel would be considered medical advice. It's here for education and entertainment purposes only, and it's up to you to talk to your healthcare professionals before following anything that I say. Okay, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about our ingredients. So we are going to start off by talking about ginger. So ginger, our herbal actions of concern here would be it works as a stimulant. So it's going to help move stuck energy and stimulate blood flow within the GI. It also has some carminative properties, warming the digestive tract up and helping to just increase that digestive fire. It's antiemetic, which means it can help fight any nausea symptoms you may be experiencing. It's also diffusive, just helping to move heat from the core of the body out into the periphery. And lastly, it's also spasmolytic, just helping to soothe spasm within the GI. Energetically, ginger is warming, drying, as well as having some stimulating and relaxing properties. Its ruling planet is the sun, and it is ruled by the element of the earth. Now, you would want to avoid ginger though if you are on any blood thinning medications, so be sure to talk to your doctor as it does have a blood thinning effect. Our next herbal ally is going to be thyme. Now, our actions of concern here would be it's a carminative, just helping to settle digestive upset, and it can also relieve digestive spasm, and it can help support a healthy microbiome, which can also lend some probiotics effect into the gut. Thyme is also a stimulant, helping to stimulate digestion in the upper digestive tract, being the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, and the first part of the small intestine. And it also holds antiseptic, antifungal, antibacterial, and antiviral properties, just showing you that it's going to help support your immune system. Energetically, thyme is warming and it's drying. It's ruled by the planet Mars and the element of the air. Now, it is contraindicated if you are on blood thinning medication, diabetes medication, and thyroid medications. And it's also not recommended for pregnant or lactating people, as it can stimulate the uterus and cause contractions. And I'm also going to advise you to avoid it if you are allergic to any of the mint family of plants. So to make this glycerin compound, you're going to need a semi-specific type of vegetable glycerin that is very easily and readily available. So you're going to need one that's classified as USP. So this is going to stand for United States Pharmacopoeia, which just means it is approved for food and beverage applications, and or a BP, which is British Pharmacopoeia pharmaceutical grade. That means it's just going to be safe to eat as well as put on your skin. Now, you could certainly add some thyme, you could add some ginger, you could throw it in some alcohol, and you could make a tincture. But there are certain benefits that can be gained with using glycerin over alcohol. So maybe you're just avoiding alcohol for a number of reasons. Maybe a child's going to be taking this medicine, maybe a pregnant person, maybe your diet protocol doesn't allow it. Or maybe you just have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol and you would just prefer to avoid it. Just know that you can still make some wonderful, wonderful herbal medications. Now, another reason you might want to choose glycerin over alcohol is if you are wanting to extract a certain group of phytochemicals or plant chemicals called tannins. You may be familiar with what tannins are already if you're a bit of a wine connoisseur. But tannins are the phytocompounds found in plants that work as astringents, helping to tighten up tissues and dry up watery secretions. And thyme and ginger actually both contain tannins. When making this glycerite compound, you have a choice between using dried herb or fresh herb. Mine are actually both going to be fresh, and my thyme was actually fresh and frozen because I took it, I got it from my garden last year. So it is perfectly fine to use fresh and frozen spices or herbs if that's how you're choosing to keep them. Now you are going to need a few different pieces of equipment to make this compound. So it's going to depend on if you're wanting to make it cold or hot. So if you're wanting to make the cold one, you're going to need 1 to 2 mason jars, some bowls to measure your herbs, a knife to chop it up. I like to use something like this. It actually attaches to a part of my immersion blender, and I just find this is a really quick way to chop up your fresh herbs. If you were using dried, you could just throw them in a spice grinder or herb grinder. So you'd also need a canning funnel, a kitchen scale to measure everything out because we are going to do this by weight, a colander to strain everything through, a container to strain things into, and a cheesecloth or muslin cloth for straining. Now, if you're wanting to make a hot compound like we're going to be doing, you will also require a stove or a hot plate. You're going to need a large pot to make a water bath. You're going to need a cloth to put in the bottom of your pot just to ensure that when we turn the water and turn the heat on, that it starts to simmer, that it's not throwing your jar around. And you're also going to need a kettle because while the water's simmering, it's going to be losing some due to evaporation. And you're just going to want to make sure that you have a way to add more water into it, and just adding water that isn't already boiling could, your jar could just crack and make a huge mess, and you would have to throw everything in the garbage, and that's not what we would want to do. So just by throwing a cloth underneath and using a kettle to boil the water, you are going to prevent that from happening. Now, before we put everything together, we are going to have to do some math. Now, don't let this math deter you. It is super simple to do. If I can do it, anybody can do it. I have an entire learning disability surrounding math and not properly working with numbers. So like I said, if I can do this, you can definitely do this. So first, you're going to want to decide if you are using fresh or dried herbs, because that is going to make a difference. So I did do the math for both of them because our ratios are a little bit different. So I'm going to just start with talking about the fresh herb, then I will talk about the ratios for the dry herb in case that's what you're using. So we are going to be doing everything in parts. So for our part, 1 part of herb is going to equal 2 ounces. And this is just based on the amount of compound I'm actually wanting to make. So menstruum, which is another word for solvent, glycerin is going to be our menstruum or our solvent. If you were making a tincture, it would be alcohol. Okay, so our menstruum is going to be 1 part of that, 2 fluid ounces. Okay, so for fresh herb, you're going to want, and I hope that you can see this on the screen. So our ratio for fresh herb is 1 part weight, 2 parts volume. Okay, so fresh herb is going to be the weight, and our volume amount is going to be our glycerin. So for our weight side, 1 part of fresh ginger is 2 ounces. 1 part of fresh thyme is 2 ounces. Okay, so our volume would be 2 parts of glycerin, which is going to equal 8 fluid ounces. So the math how we got there would be 1 part ginger plus 1 part thyme is 4 ounces. Okay, 4 ounces of herbs times 2, because that's our volume ratio, would equal 8 fluid ounces. So that means that we're going to end up with 2 times as much glycerin to herb, like our ratio says. Now, if you were going to be using dried herb, it is a little bit different. Here our ratio is 1 to 5. So 1 part weight to 5 parts volume. okay? So our weight would be 1 part dried ginger, 2 ounces, 1 part dried thyme, 2 ounces, okay? Now to figure out how much glycerin we're going to require. Now, if you are using fresh herbs, it already has its water content in it. I'll show you a little bit more about that in a second. So we are going to need to make sure that we add some water into our glycerin to make sure that we get all of those plant chemicals into our glycerite compound. So you're going to need 5 parts glycerin, which means we need 20 fluid ounces total. But we don't want 20 fluid ounces total of just straight glycerin. We're actually going to have to add some water into it. Now, when you are watering down your glycerin, you're going to want to make sure that you have at least a 60% glycerin, 40% water left over. Now, just to play it on the safe side, to make sure that our glycerin does not lower below that 60%, to make sure that it's shelf stable, we're going to add some water into it. So a good ratio to follow is 3 to 1. So you would want 75% or 3 parts of vegetable glycerin and 25% or 5 ounces of distilled water, okay? Or spring or filtered of some sort. So let's just do our math here. So I have 1 part ginger, 1 part thyme is 4 ounces of herb still. So that's 4 ounces of herb times 5, which is going to be 20 fluid ounces. And that means that you have 5 times as much glycerin as you have to herb, which is what our ratio wanted. So I hope all of that math made sense. If it did not, if you need a better way to have it explained, I would definitely check out the blog article that is linked in the description box below this video, and I just break it down in there in a slightly different way. Now, I just want to show you something. So our ginger, here is 2 ounces of fresh ginger, okay? In this one, it's actually 1.75. I was a little bit short on my dried ginger, but you can actually see what a size difference there is between the two, and that has to do with that water content. So that is why we are not needing to water down our glycerin if we are using fresh herb, because it has that much water in it already. Okay, so now it is time to put everything together. So what you're going to do is you'll need a mason jar, and I like to just use a canning funnel. I find it to make things a little bit neater and less messy. So in here, we're going to put our 2 ounces of ginger. And then we are going to use 2 ounces of fresh thyme. And like I said, you're just going to want to make sure that these are chopped up nicely before adding them to your jar. The smaller your pieces of plant material are, the more surface area is exposed to the glycerin, the more you're going to be able to extract. And then next, we are going to be adding 8 fluid ounces of our vegetable glycerin. Then I just like to use something like a chopstick and just make sure that everything is stirred and it is covered with our glycerin. Now, as you can see, our herb is actually higher than what our amount of glycerin is. So if that is the case with yours as well, and it really just depends on how fluffy the herbs are, we're going to have to add one more part of our glycerin. So we will just go ahead and add 2 more fluid ounces. Perfect. And we're just going to keep adding by the part just until everything is nicely covered up. Perfect. That's better now. Okay, so now once you have everything in your jar, we're just going to put a lid on it. Now, if you were mixing your vegetable glycerin and water together, because maybe you were using dried herb, I would suggest, because glycerin is quite thick and sticky, I would suggest pouring it in its own mason jar and then adding the water to it and then just giving it just a nice shake to just incorporate everything in that way. It will be a lot easier to mix in with your herbs if you have that glycerin and that water pre-mixed together, okay? So then we are just going to take a pot. Like I said, we're just going to put a clean rag in it. We're going to add our glycerin, and then you're just going to want to add enough water so that it comes up the side of the jar higher than what the amount of herbs in the jar are, okay? In other words, we just want to make sure that our warm water, once it's simmering, is going to be higher than the height of the herb, but you do not need to fill the pot all the way up to the top. All right, my pitcher did not hold enough water, so I just have to add a little bit more. Perfect. So the water is about here, and our herbs would be about here. So that's a good amount to just make sure that it is nicely surrounding your jar with our water. Now, if you were wanting to make this in a cold process, before I get too ahead of myself, you would want to take your jar with your herbs, your glycerin, and your water, and you would just want to let this sit for 4 weeks at room temperature, up to 6, okay? And then you would just want to make sure that you're giving it a little shake every day or every other day, okay? And that is fine. That will get you a beautiful glycerin. But I don't want to wait 4 weeks. So by adding some heat, we are definitely going to speed up the extraction process, and we're going to be able to do this in about 3 to 4 hours. So we're going to throw our pot with our water onto the stove, and you're going to just bring it up to a gentle simmer. Once it starts simmering, you're going to want to take note of what time it is. And you're going to want to let the water gently simmer for 3 to 4 hours. Okay, and just pay attention to replace any water that you've lost through steam or evaporation, and we're just going to use our kettle to boil water before adding it so that we don't end up cracking our jar. Once we have simmered and everything is done cooking, I will show you what we do next. So we have started to simmer. Now it is just time to turn the stove down so it's just gently simmering, and this is the point where we are going to start counting our 3 to 4 hours. We have been simmering for about 35 to 40 minutes now, and the water in the pot has reached the top level of our glycerin. So we are going to go and add some more boiling water. Now we are going to just continue simmering for about another 2.5 hours. Okay, so it has been about 3.5 hours. So now what we want to do is we want to take our jar out of the pot of simmering water, and before we open it, we are just going to allow it to cool down a little bit. If you were to open it now, what might happen is there'd be some pressure that was built up in here with the heat, and you might end up with thyme and ginger and glycerin all over your ceiling. And that is not what we would want. So we're just going to allow this to cool off for about 15-20 minutes, and then we will press it out. Once you are able to touch the sides of your jar without it being too hot, it feels nice and warm, but that's it, you're going to be ready to strain. Now, this did take about 25 minutes of cooling time to get to this point. Now, let's say you got distracted and it's been about 40 minutes and you come back and this is cold to the touch. Well, what you would want to do then is put your water back on and warm it up for about 15 minutes, because the glycerin is going to be much easier to squeeze out of the herbs when it is more liquid, and the warmer it is, the more liquidy that it is. Okay, so what we're going to do is I will show you our setup on what you would want to strain this with. So we're just going to start with a larger bowl we're going to put underneath. We will need some type of strainer. I just like this little one. And I have these reusable pieces of muslin or cheesecloth that I like to use. You can just use regular cheesecloth if that's what you have. Now, another thing that I do like to do, this is completely optional, glycerin is sticky. So I like to just use a pair of gloves to do the pressing, just so that my hands don't get super messy later. But again, it's completely optional. But oh my goodness, does this ever just smell delightful? So just a big old whiff of just thyme. And oh, I like the smell of thyme. Okay. Now, you could definitely do this in a couple different steps. We don't have a very large amount, so this is something that is easy to press just on its own. But if it was a larger amount, you could certainly just put in a little bit at a time and then just squeeze it out. Wearing the rubber gloves too will also just ensure that there's no outside contaminants that end up in your herbal medicine. So let us just move this out of the way. You can take your herbs and throw them in your compost bin or just in the garbage if you don't have one. All right, and then all there is left to do is bottle. So I like just these little amber colored bottles. You could use a clear one if you wanted. The choice is yours. This is just what I happen to have. So before we pour it in, let us see. So we have, because we added those extra 2 ounces or 2 fluid ounces of the glycerin, and we are just at about 9 ounces. So we could probably try to squeeze a little bit more out of our ginger and our thyme if we wanted to, but I'm happy with this. So I just like to take a little funnel and pour it in the jar. But just look at this beautiful color of all of the different plant constituents that we got from our thyme and our ginger, and that are just nicely in our glycerin now. And there you have it. Here is your Glycerite for a happy digestive system. Dosage would be starting at about 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon, up to 3 times a day. You can put a little bit in water, or you can just take it straight. Now, at the beginning of this video, I told you that there were some other herbs that you might want to consider adding. You could choose chamomile for its relaxant properties, as well as it being a nervine. It is an inflammation modulator, and it also holds carminative properties. Now, I'm going to link in the description box below this video a video that I did on different herbal actions, in case you're not familiar with some of the words that I just used. You could also use fennel. That is also a carminative, it's also a spasmolytic, and it holds antimicrobial properties. You could maybe choose rosemary. It's a diuretic, which means it can help purge excess moisture from the system, as well as being a carminative and a spasmolytic. Now, rosemary also holds some properties that can help prevent damage to the liver. You might want to consider adding peppermint. It's also a carminative and a nervine with analgesic and spasmolytic properties. Or you could try holy basil. That's also a carminative, but it holds tropho-restorative properties, specifically helping the adrenal response, reducing cortisol levels and adrenaline levels by helping to calm the central nervous system. So go ahead and comment down below and let me know, what other herbal medicines are you interested in learning how to make? And don't forget to hit the like button if you've liked this video, and maybe share it with somebody else who you think might enjoy it. Consider subscribing to the channel so that we can spend more time together and that you don't miss future videos. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, so be sure to connect with me over there as well. But I just want to say thanks for stopping by today, and I'll see you next time.